The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in April of 1882, and with it came the news that turned Amelia Lawson's world to ash. She stood in the dusty main street of Evanston, Wyoming, the yellow paper trembling in her hands as the words blurred before her eyes. David was dead. Her fiancé, who had left 3 months earlier to drive cattle north to Montana, had been caught in a spring blizzard and frozen to death along with 2 other cowhands. The telegram from the trail boss was brief and impersonal, stating only the facts and where David's body had been buried in a small cemetery outside of Billings. There would be no goodbye, no final words, no chance to say all the things she had been saving up to tell him when he returned. Amelia walked back to the boarding house where she rented a small room, her feet moving without conscious thought. The world around her seemed muffled, as if she were underwater. She could see people going about their business, hear the distant sounds of hammers and wagon wheels, smell the familiar scent of wood smoke and horse manure that always hung over the town, but none of it felt real. Nothing would ever feel real again. Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house proprietress, took one look at her face and gathered her into a fierce embrace. The older woman asked no questions, just held her while Amelia stood rigid and dry-eyed, unable to cry, unable to feel anything but a vast emptiness that threatened to swallow her whole. The days that followed passed in a gray haze. Amelia continued working at the general store where she kept the accounts and helped customers, but she moved through her duties mechanically. Mr. Patterson, the store owner, was kind enough not to comment on her mistakes or her vacant stares. Everyone in Evanston had heard about David Mercer's death. In a town of barely 800 souls, there were no secrets. It was 2 weeks after the telegram arrived that Thomas Landry first spoke to her beyond a simple greeting. Amelia had known of him, of course. Everyone knew Thomas Landry. He owned the second-largest ranch in the territory, a spread of over 5,000 acres that ran cattle and bred some of the finest horses in Wyoming. He was 32 years old, unmarried, and the subject of much speculation among the unmarried women of Evanston and their mothers. But Thomas seemed uninterested in courting, focused entirely on building his ranch into something that would last. Amelia was restocking shelves when she heard his deep voice behind her. "Miss Lawson, I wanted to offer my condolences. David Mercer was a good man. I hired him for 2 drives, and he was one of the most reliable hands I ever worked with." She turned to find him standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. Thomas was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who worked hard every day of his life. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and his eyes were a striking gray that seemed to see right through a person. His face was weathered from years in the sun and wind, with lines around his eyes and a strong jaw that was currently covered with a few days' worth of stubble. "Thank you, Mr. Landry," Amelia managed, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. "That is kind of you to say." He nodded, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. "If there is anything you need, Miss Lawson, anything at all, you need only ask. I mean that sincerely." Before she could respond, he placed his hat back on his head, tipped it respectfully, and left the store with his purchases. Amelia stood there for a long moment, staring after him, surprised by the genuine compassion she had heard in his voice. As spring turned to summer, Amelia found herself noticing Thomas Landry more often. He came to town every week or 2 for supplies, and he always made a point of greeting her courteously. He never pressed her for conversation, never tried to engage her beyond simple pleasantries, but there was something in his manner that suggested he was watching over her from a distance. In June, A traveling preacher came through Evanston and held a memorial service for all those who had died in the past year. Amelia attended, sitting in the small wooden church with her hands folded in her lap, listening to the preacher talk about the hope of resurrection and eternal life. The words washed over her without bringing comfort. How could she think about eternity when she could barely face tomorrow? After the service, as people filed out into the bright summer sunshine, Amelia found herself walking alone toward the small cemetery at the edge of town. David was not buried there, but she needed to be somewhere quiet, somewhere away from the well-meaning sympathy of her neighbors. She sat on a wooden bench beneath a cottonwood tree and finally allowed herself to cry. The tears came in great, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for David, for the life they would never have together, for the children they would never raise, for all the dreams that had died with him in that Montana blizzard. When the storm of grief finally subsided, Amelia became aware that she was not alone. Thomas Landry sat on the far end of the bench, his hat beside him, staring out at the prairie that stretched endlessly beyond the cemetery. He said nothing, did not look at her, but his presence was somehow comforting. "I am sorry," Amelia said, wiping her face with her handkerchief. "I did not mean to make a spectacle of myself." "Grief is not a spectacle," Thomas said quietly, still looking out at the horizon. "It is the price we pay for loving someone. There is no shame in it." They sat in silence for a while longer. Finally, Thomas stood and picked up his hat. "I will be heading back to the ranch now, Miss Lawson, but I want you to know something." He turned to look at her then, and the intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "You are not alone in this world. There are people who care about you, who would count it a privilege to help you carry this burden. Please remember that." He walked away before she could respond, mounting his horse and riding out of town toward the open range. Amelia watched him go, feeling something stir in her chest that was not quite hope, but perhaps the memory of what hope felt like. As summer deepened, Amelia began to emerge slowly from the fog of her grief. The pain was still there, a constant ache in her chest, but she found that she could function again, could sometimes go hours without thinking about David. She felt guilty about this, as if forgetting her pain was a betrayal of his memory. Mrs. Henderson tried to draw her out, inviting her to social gatherings and church socials, but Amelia declined. She was not ready to pretend to be happy, to make small talk and smile at jokes. Instead, she spent her evenings in her room, reading books borrowed from the small lending library or writing long letters to her sister back in Ohio. It was late July when Thomas Landry came into the general store with an unusual request. "Miss Lawson, I am in need of someone to help me with my accounts. My previous bookkeeper moved to California last month, and I am afraid I have let the ledgers get into quite a state. Mr. Patterson mentioned that you are excellent with figures. Would you be willing to take on the work? I could pay you well, and you could do most of it here in town. I would only need you to come out to the ranch once a week to go over things with me." Amelia hesitated. The extra money would be welcome. She was living on her small salary from the general store, and there was little left over after paying for her room and board. But going out to the Landry ranch felt like a step towards something she was not sure she was ready for. As if reading her thoughts, Thomas added, "It would be strictly a business arrangement, Miss Lawson. Nothing more. I simply need someone I can trust to keep accurate records, and you have that reputation." "Very well," Amelia heard herself say. "I can look at your ledgers this week and let you know what needs to be done." Thomas smiled then, a genuine expression of pleasure that transformed his weathered face. "Thank you, Miss Lawson. I will bring them by tomorrow." True to his word, Thomas arrived the next morning with a stack of ledgers and loose papers that were indeed in a terrible state. Amelia spent the following week working on them in the evenings after the store closed, gradually bringing order to the chaos of unpaid bills, livestock sales, and payroll records. The following Saturday, she rode out to the Landry ranch in the buckboard that Thomas had sent for her, driven by an older cowhand named Pete, who had a kind face and a gentle manner with the horses. The ranch was about 8 miles from town, situated in a valley where a creek ran year-round, providing water for the cattle and horses. The main house was a large 2-story structure built of logs and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. It was well maintained but clearly a bachelor's residence, lacking the touches that a woman would have added. Nearby stood a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, a large barn, several corrals, and various outbuildings. Thomas met her at the porch steps and helped her down from the buckboard. "Welcome to the Lazy L," he said, gesturing at the spread around them. "I know it is not much to look at, but it is home." "It is beautiful," Amelia said honestly, looking at the valley with its creek and the mountains rising in the distance. "You have built something fine here, Mr. Landry." They spent the afternoon going over the accounts, and Amelia was impressed by Thomas's knowledge of his own business. He might not be good at keeping ledgers, but he knew exactly how many head of cattle he had, what each horse was worth, and what every expense meant for the ranch's future. He asked intelligent questions and listened carefully to her suggestions. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, Thomas invited her to stay for supper. "My cook, Maria, makes the best chili in Wyoming. It would be a shame for you to make the trip back to town without trying it." Maria turned out to be a middle-aged Mexican woman with a warm smile and a no-nonsense manner. She clearly ran Thomas's household with an iron hand, and it was equally clear that he respected and valued her. The chili was indeed excellent, flavored with peppers and spices that made Amelia's eyes water in the best way. Over supper, Thomas talked about the ranch, about his plans to expand the horse breeding operation, about the challenges of running a spread this size. He asked about Amelia's life, but in a respectful way that did not pry. She found herself telling him about growing up in Ohio, about coming west 3 years ago to live with her aunt who had since passed away, about meeting David at a church social. "He wanted to save up enough money to buy a small place of our own," Amelia said, surprised at how easy it was to talk about David with Thomas. "That is why he took the cattle drive jobs. The pay was good and he was young and strong. He thought it was an adventure." Her voice broke slightly on the last word. Thomas reached across the table and covered her hand with his own. His hand was large and calloused from hard work, but his touch was gentle. He was right to think it was an adventure, and he was right to want to build a future with you. His death was a tragedy, but the love you shared was real and good. Never doubt that. Amelia felt tears prick her eyes, but they were different from the bitter tears she had shed before. These were softer, gentler, a release of some of the pain she had been carrying. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Thomas drove her back to town himself in a small buggy. The summer night was beautiful, with stars blazing overhead and the sound of crickets filling the air. As they approached Evanston, Thomas said, "Miss Lawson, I want you to know that I understand you are still grieving. I would never presume to rush you through that process. But I also want you to know that I admire you greatly. Your strength, your intelligence, your kindness. When you are ready, if you are ever ready, I would be honored to court you properly. But until then, I am content to simply be your friend." Amelia turned to look at him in surprise. In the moonlight, his face was serious and sincere. "Mr. Landry, I do not know what to say." "You do not need to say anything," Thomas replied. "I just wanted you to know where I stand. I will wait, Miss Lawson. However long it takes, I will wait." Those words stayed with Amelia long after she returned to her room at the boarding house. She lay awake that night, thinking about Thomas Landry and the unexpected feelings he stirred in her. She felt guilty for even thinking about another man when David had been dead for only 4 months. But at the same time, she felt something she had not felt since that terrible Tuesday in April. She felt alive. Over the following weeks, Amelia continued to work on the ranch accounts and make her weekly visits to the Lazy L. Thomas was always respectful, always careful not to cross any boundaries, but there was a warmth growing between them that could not be denied. They talked about everything from literature to politics to the future of the cattle industry. Amelia discovered that Thomas was far more educated than most ranchers, having attended university in the East before coming west to make his fortune. "Why did you never marry?" Amelia asked him one afternoon as they sat on the porch going over the quarterly accounts. "Surely you have had opportunities." Thomas was quiet for a moment, looking out at the valley. "I suppose I was waiting for the right woman. I saw too many men marry for convenience or because society expected it, and I did not want that. I wanted what my parents had, a true partnership built on love and respect. My mother died when I was 15, and my father never remarried. He said he could never love anyone the way he loved her, and he would rather live alone than settle for less." "That is beautiful," Amelia said softly, "and sad." "It is both," Thomas agreed, "but I understood what he meant. Love like that, when you find it, is worth waiting for." The summer turned to fall, and the aspens in the mountains blazed gold against the deep blue sky. Amelia found that she looked forward to her weekly trips to the ranch with an anticipation that both pleased and frightened her. She was falling for Thomas Landry, she realized. His quiet strength, his patience, his steady presence in her life had become something she depended on, but the guilt still gnawed at her. How could she love someone new when David had been gone less than a year? Was she dishonoring his memory by allowing these feelings to grow? One evening in late September, as Thomas drove her back to town, she finally voiced her concerns. "Mr. Landry, I need to be honest with you. I have feelings for you that go beyond friendship, but I feel terrible about it. David has been gone for only 5 months. What kind of woman moves on so quickly?" Thomas pulled the buggy to a stop and turned to face her. In the fading light, his eyes were soft with understanding. "May I tell you something my father told me after my mother died? He said that grief is not a test of how much you loved someone. The depth of your love is not measured by how long you mourn. It is measured by how fully you loved while you had the chance. From everything you have told me about David, he loved you with his whole heart. And I believe he would want you to be happy, to live fully, to love again when you were ready." "But how do I know if I am ready?" Amelia asked, her voice breaking. "I think you will know," Thomas said gently. "And until then, I meant what I said. I will wait. There is no rush, Amelia. We have all the time in the world." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver through her. "Thomas," she said, testing his name on her tongue, "I think I would like it if we could be more than friends, but I need to take it slowly. Can you understand that?" "I can understand that very well," Thomas replied, and the smile he gave her was like the sun breaking through clouds. From that day forward, their relationship shifted subtly. Thomas began calling on her properly, taking her to church socials and town dances, bringing her small gifts like wildflowers or books he thought she would enjoy. The people of Evanston watched with interest and general approval. Thomas Landry was a good man, and Amelia Lawson deserved happiness after her tragedy. But not everyone was pleased. Sarah Fleming, A young woman who had been setting her cap at Thomas for years made her displeasure known through pointed comments and cold stares. One afternoon in the general store, she confronted Amelia directly. "It must be nice to have secured such a fine catch so quickly after your loss," Sarah said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Some might say it was almost too quick." Amelia felt anger rise in her chest, hot and fierce. "Some might say it is none of their business," she replied evenly. "And some might say that making judgments about another person's grief is both cruel and ignorant." Sarah's face flushed red, but before she could respond, Mr. Patterson intervened. "Miss Fleming, if you are not here to make a purchase, I will have to ask you to leave. I do not tolerate gossip in my establishment." After Sarah left in a huff, Mr. Patterson patted Amelia's shoulder. "Do not let her get to you, my dear. She is just jealous. Everyone who knows you understands that you are a woman of integrity." But Sarah's words had struck a nerve, and that evening, Amelia found herself questioning everything again. Was she moving too fast? Were people talking about her behind her back? Thomas seemed to sense her distress when he came to call that evening. They walked along the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie. "What is troubling you?" he asked. Amelia told him about the encounter with Sarah and about her renewed doubts. Thomas listened carefully, then stopped walking and turned to face her. "Amelia, I need you to understand something. I do not care what Sarah Fleming or anyone else thinks about us. The only opinions that matter are yours and mine, and I know my own heart. I love you. I have loved you since the day I saw you crying in the cemetery, showing the depth of your capacity to love. I love your strength and your kindness and your courage. But I also know that you are still healing, and I will never push you faster than you are ready to go." Amelia felt tears sting her eyes. "You love me." "I do," Thomas said simply. "But you do not need to say anything in return, not until you are certain of your own feelings." "But I am certain," Amelia heard herself say, and as the words left her mouth she realized they were true. "I love you too, Thomas. It frightens me how much I love you. I feel like I am being disloyal to David's memory, but I cannot help how I feel." Thomas took her hands in his. "David was your past, and he will always be a part of you. I would never ask you to forget him or pretend he did not exist. But I want to be your future, Amelia, if you will have me." "I will have you," Amelia whispered, and then Thomas was kissing her, gentle and sweet, and she was kissing him back, feeling alive and whole for the first time in months. The winter of 1882 was one of the coldest on record in Wyoming, but Amelia barely noticed. She and Thomas were officially courting now, and despite the bitter cold, she made the trip out to the ranch every week. Thomas had given her a beautiful mare named Stella, gentle and sure-footed, so she could ride out on her own when the buckboard could not get through the snow. They spent long evenings by the fire in Thomas's parlor, with Maria serving as a proper chaperone, talking about their future together. Thomas wanted to marry in the spring, and Amelia found that the idea filled her with joy rather than guilt. She had finally accepted that loving Thomas did not diminish what she had felt for David. The heart, she had learned, was capable of holding more than one love in different ways and at different times. In February, Thomas took her to a small box canyon on the far side of his property. "I want to build our house here," he said, gesturing at a flat area near a spring. "It would be just for us, while the main ranch house can be used for the hands and for business. What do you think?" Amelia looked around at the sheltered valley with its towering rock walls and the clear spring bubbling up from the ground. "It is perfect," she said. "We could have a garden here and the children would have room to play." "Children?" Thomas asked, a smile playing at his lips. Amelia blushed. "Well, I assume we will want children eventually." "Eventually," Thomas agreed, pulling her close. and sooner rather than later, I hope." They married on a beautiful day in May of 1883, just over a year after David's death. The wedding was held in the small church in Evanston, with the whole town in attendance. Amelia wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that Thomas had picked himself from the meadows on his ranch. As she walked down the aisle toward Thomas, who stood waiting for her with love shining in his gray eyes, Amelia felt a sense of peace settle over her. She would always carry a small sadness for David and the life they might have had. But she also knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The reception was held at the Landry Ranch, with tables set up outside under the cottonwood trees. Maria had outdone herself with the food, and there was music and dancing late into the night. As Amelia danced with her new husband under the stars, she caught sight of Mrs. Henderson wiping away happy tears. "Are you happy?" Thomas murmured in her ear. "Deliriously so," Amelia replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Their first year of marriage was one of hard work and deep contentment. The house in the Box Canyon was completed by late summer, a comfortable two-story structure with large windows that let in the mountain light. Amelia threw herself into making it a home, sewing curtains and braiding rugs and planting a garden near the spring. She continued to keep the ranch accounts, now working from a small office that Thomas had built for her in the new house. The Lazy L was thriving under their combined management. Thomas handled the livestock and the hands, while Amelia managed the finances and the horse breeding records. They made a good team, complementing each other's strengths. But the best part of marriage, Amelia discovered, was the intimacy of sharing a life with someone. The quiet mornings drinking coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise over the mountains. The evenings reading aloud to each other by the fire. The way Thomas would come find her during the day just to steal a kiss or tell her something he had thought of. The nights wrapped in each other's arms, learning the geography of each other's bodies and souls. In the spring of 1884, Amelia realized she was pregnant. She told Thomas one evening after supper, suddenly nervous about how he would react. But Thomas let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "Amelia, we are going to have a baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Amelia was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down. Thomas hovered anxiously, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, adjusting her pillows, reading to her when she was too exhausted to do anything but lie still. Maria moved into the guest room to help care for her, clucking over her like a mother hen. But as the months passed, Amelia's health improved and she began to bloom with pregnancy. Thomas could not keep his hands off her growing belly, talking to the baby and feeling for kicks. "I think it is a boy," he said one evening. "He is going to be big and strong like his mother." "Like his mother?" Amelia asked with a laugh. "I think you have that backward." "No," Thomas said seriously. "You are the strongest person I know, Amelia. You survived heartbreak and came out the other side with your capacity to love intact. That takes more strength than anything I have ever done." Their son was born in December of 1884, during a fierce snowstorm that trapped them in the canyon for 3 days. The doctor could not get through from town, so Maria delivered the baby with Thomas assisting. It was a long, difficult labor, and there were moments when Thomas feared he would lose them both. But Amelia was indeed strong, and when their son finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Thomas wept with relief and joy. They named him Daniel Thomas Landry. Amelia had wanted to honor David in some way, and Daniel was close enough to feel like a tribute without being too obvious. Thomas agreed immediately, understanding the need to acknowledge the man who had come before him. Daniel was a beautiful baby, with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. He was also, as Thomas had predicted, big and strong, thriving from the start. Amelia had never imagined she could love anyone as much as she loved this tiny person who had come from her body. But watching Thomas with their son was a revelation. He was a natural father, patient and gentle, singing to Daniel and walking him when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint. "I want him to know he is loved," Thomas said simply when Amelia commented on how involved he was. "I want him to grow up secure in that knowledge." The years that followed were good ones. The ranch continued to prosper and their family grew. A daughter, Emily, was born in 1886, followed by another son, Samuel, in 1888. The house in the canyon rang with the sounds of children's laughter, and Amelia often found herself marveling at how full her life had become. There were challenges, of course. The winter of 1887 was brutal, killing off a significant portion of their herd. A drought in 1889 tested their resources and their resilience. There were illnesses and injuries, the normal trials of ranching life. But Thomas and Amelia faced everything together, their love and partnership growing stronger with each passing year. On a warm evening in May of 1890, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Thomas took Amelia's hand. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked quietly. About David, Amelia was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Usually on the anniversary of his death or when something reminds me of that time in my life. But it is different now. The pain is gone, replaced by a kind of gentle sadness. I am grateful for the time we had, and I am sad that he never got to live the life he wanted. But I do not wish things were different. Does that make me terrible?" "No," Thomas said, squeezing her hand. "It makes you human. And it makes me grateful beyond words that you were willing to love again after losing him. I know it took courage." "You made it easy," Amelia replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You were so patient with me, Thomas. You gave me the time I needed to heal, and you never made me feel guilty for my grief. I do not think I ever properly thanked you for that." "You thank me every day," Thomas said, kissing the top of her head. "By being you, by loving me and our children, by building this life with me. I am the luckiest man in Wyoming." Amelia Landry. "I am fairly lucky myself," Amelia said with a smile, watching Daniel chase Emily around the garden while baby Samuel toddled after them on unsteady legs. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, Amelia reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She had loved and lost, grieved and healed, and found love again in the most unexpected way. The woman she was now was different from the girl who had received that telegram 8 years ago. She was stronger, wiser, more aware of both the fragility and the resilience of the human heart. That night, after the children were asleep, Thomas and Amelia stood together on their porch, wrapped in each other's arms. "I have been thinking," Thomas said, "about expanding the horse breeding operation. There is good money in it, and I think we could make the Lazy L known throughout the territory for quality stock." "Tell me more," Amelia said, always interested in his plans for the ranch. They talked late into the night, making plans and dreaming dreams, the way they had been doing since the beginning of their marriage. And later, in the privacy of their bedroom, they made love with the easy passion of long familiarity and deep affection. Two people who had chosen each other and chose each other again every single day. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing children. Daniel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with the horses. Emily was bright and spirited, always asking questions and getting into mischief. Samuel was gentle and sweet-natured, with a gift for making friends with every animal on the ranch. In 1892, Amelia became pregnant again, much to her surprise. "I thought we were done," she told Thomas with a laugh when she shared the news. She was 33 years old now, and this pregnancy was harder than the others. But in the spring of 1893, she gave birth to twin girls, Alice and Anne, who kept the entire household in a state of controlled chaos. Thomas hired more help for the house so Amelia would not be overwhelmed, and he took on even more of the ranch work so she could focus on the babies. But despite the exhaustion and the challenges of managing 5 children, Amelia had never been happier. One afternoon in the summer of 1895, as Amelia sat in the garden watching the twins play while the older children helped Thomas with the horses, she was struck by a profound sense of gratitude. Her life was so full, so rich, so different from anything she could have imagined that terrible day in 1882 when the telegram arrived. She thought about David sometimes, yes, but she thought about him with fondness now, as someone she had loved in a different life. If he could see her now, she believed he would be happy for her. He had been a good man, kind and loving, and he would have wanted her to find happiness after his death. That evening, as she and Thomas sat on the porch after the children were asleep, she told him what she had been thinking. "I finally understand what you meant all those years ago," she said. "About the depth of love not being measured by the length of mourning. I loved David with the love of a young woman who did not yet know herself. But I love you with the love of a woman who has lived and suffered and grown. It is a deeper love in many ways because it is built on a foundation of shared experience and true partnership." Thomas pulled her close, and she could feel his heart beating against her cheek. "I love you more than words can say, Amelia. You are my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children, and the love of my life. Every day with you is a gift." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one over the Wyoming mountains. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and closer by, the horses nickered softly in the corral. The sounds of home, the sounds of the life they had built together. As the years turned into decades, Thomas and Amelia watched their children grow and start families of their own. Daniel married a rancher's daughter from the next county and took over much of the day-to-day running of the Lazy L. Emily married a lawyer from Cheyenne and moved to the capital, where she became involved in the suffrage movement. Samuel became a veterinarian, the first in the family to attend university back east. The twins, Alice and Anne, remained close throughout their lives, both marrying local men and settling near enough to visit often. Through it all, Thomas and Amelia remained each other's constant. They weathered the economic panics of the 1890s, the hard winters and dry summers, the inevitable trials of aging and loss. They buried friends and employees, celebrated the births of grandchildren, and watched the West change around them as the frontier era gave way to a more settled existence. In 1912, as they approached their 30th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Amelia with a trip to San Francisco. It was the first time either of them had been so far from the ranch, and they marveled at the city with its tall buildings and electric lights and automobiles. "Do you ever wish we had lived somewhere more exciting?" Thomas asked her one evening as they walked along the waterfront, watching the ships come and go. "Not for a moment," Amelia replied honestly. "Our life has been exactly what I wanted. Adventure is not always about seeing new places, Thomas. Sometimes it is about building something lasting, about creating a legacy. And that is what we have done." They returned to Wyoming and to the ranch, which felt more like home than ever after their time away. The house in the canyon had been expanded over the years, with rooms added for visiting children and grandchildren. The Lazy L was now one of the premier horse breeding operations in the state, known for producing quality stock that sold to buyers as far away as Texas and California. But what Amelia valued most was not the success or the prosperity. It was the life she had built with Thomas, the family they had created together, the love that had sustained them through 3 decades of marriage. On their actual anniversary in May of 1913, their children threw them a huge celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from all over the county, and there was a barbecue and dancing and speeches that made Amelia cry happy tears. As she and Thomas danced together under the stars, just as they had on their wedding night 30 years earlier, she felt the weight of all those years like a blessing. "Thank you," she whispered to him. "For what?" Thomas asked, though his eyes suggested he knew. "For waiting. For being patient with my grief. For loving me enough to let me heal at my own pace. I do not know what my life would have been without you, and I do not want to imagine it." "I told you I would wait," Thomas reminded her, his voice rough with emotion. "And I would have waited forever if that was what you needed. You were worth waiting for, Amelia. You are still worth everything." They were both older now, both marked by the passage of time. Thomas's dark hair was completely gray, and Amelia's had gone silver. Their faces were deeply lined, their bodies not as strong as they once were. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they had been when they fell in love. The connection between them was as strong as ever, perhaps even stronger for having been tested and proven over 3 decades. As the celebration wound down and their children and grandchildren departed, Thomas and Amelia returned to their house in the canyon. They sat on the porch, as they had done thousands of times before, watching the familiar landscape of their home. "Do you remember the first time I brought you here?" Thomas asked. "When I told you I wanted to build our house in this spot?" "I remember everything," Amelia said softly. "I remember how scared I was to love again and how gentle you were with my fear. I remember learning to trust again, to hope again. You gave me back my life, Thomas." "We gave each other life," Thomas corrected. "Before I met you, I was just existing, building a ranch but not really living. You taught me what it meant to truly share my life with someone. You made me a better man." They sat together until the stars came out, holding hands and speaking occasionally, but mostly just being together in comfortable silence. After 30 years of marriage, they had learned that sometimes the best communication required no words at all. In the years that followed, as they entered their later years, Thomas and Amelia continued to work together running the ranch, though they gradually handed over more responsibility to Daniel and his family. They treasured their time with their grandchildren, who numbered 14 by 1920, and they took joy in watching the next generation grow up on the land they had worked so hard to build into something lasting. They also traveled more, taking trips to visit Emily in Cheyenne and Samuel in Denver, where he had established a successful veterinary practice. They even made a trip back east to see the places Thomas had lived as a young man, and to visit Amelia's sister in Ohio, whom she had not seen in over 30 years. But they always returned to the ranch, to the house in the canyon, to the land that had become so much a part of who they were. Wyoming was home in a way that nowhere else could ever be. In the spring of 1925, as they were preparing to celebrate their 42nd wedding anniversary, Thomas fell ill. At first, it seemed like a simple cold, but it quickly developed into pneumonia. The doctor came from town, and the children gathered, but there was little anyone could do but wait and hope. Amelia sat by Thomas's bedside day and night, holding his hand and talking to him, telling him stories of their life together, reminding him of all the reasons he needed to fight. For a while, it seemed like he might pull through. But one night, as Amelia dozed in the chair beside his bed, Thomas squeezed her hand weakly to wake her. "Amelia," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "I need you to know something." "SHH," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Save your strength." "No, I need to say this," Thomas insisted. "Every single day with you has been a gift. Every moment, every laugh, every challenge we faced together. I have lived a full and happy life because of you. Do not grieve too long for me, love. Promise me." "Thomas, please," Amelia sobbed. "Do not leave me." "I will never leave you," Thomas said, his gray eyes locking with hers one last time. "I will be waiting for you just like I waited before, but not for a long time yet. You still have living to do." He died just before dawn, with Amelia holding his hand and their children gathered around the bed. He slipped away peacefully, a slight smile on his weathered face, as if he were seeing something beautiful. The grief that followed was devastating, but it was different from what Amelia had experienced when David died. This time, she had 42 years of memories to sustain her, 42 years of love and partnership and shared life. The pain was immense, but so too was the gratitude she felt for having had such a remarkable man as her husband for so long. At the funeral, which was attended by what seemed like half of Wyoming, Daniel gave a eulogy that captured perfectly who Thomas had been. "My father was a man of integrity and honor," he said. "He built this ranch with his own hands, but more importantly, he built a family based on love and respect. He taught us that patience is not weakness but strength, that waiting for the right thing is always better than settling for what is convenient, and that true love is worth any amount of time or effort. He loved our mother with a devotion that was inspirational to witness, and he loved each of us in a way that made us feel valued and seen. The legacy he leaves is not just this ranch, but the example of how to live a good life." In the days and weeks that followed, Amelia slowly adjusted to life without Thomas. The house felt empty without his presence, and she often found herself turning to tell him something before remembering he was gone. But she was surrounded by her children and grandchildren, who rallied around her with love and support. She continued to live in the house in the canyon, refusing Daniel's suggestion that she move in with him and his family. "This is my home," she said firmly. "The home your father and I built together. I will stay here as long as I am able." And she did, living independently with help from Maria's daughter Rosa, who had taken over as housekeeper years earlier. Amelia spent her days working in her garden, reading, writing letters to her far-flung family, and entertaining the constant stream of grandchildren and great-grandchildren who came to visit. She also spent time remembering, not dwelling in the past, but honoring it, taking out the memories like precious treasures and examining them in the light. She thought about David sometimes, about the young man who had died so tragically, and the young woman she had been who had loved him. But mostly she thought about Thomas, about the way he had seen her grief and had not tried to rush her through it, about the way he had waited patiently for her to be ready to love again. That patience, she realized, had been the greatest gift anyone had ever given her. It had allowed her to heal at her own pace, to honor her past while building a future. And it had resulted in a marriage that had been everything she could have hoped for and more. One afternoon in the summer of 1930, as Amelia sat on the porch watching her great-grandchildren play in the yard, Emily came to visit. Now in her mid-40s with children of her own, Emily settled into the chair next to her mother and took her hand. "Mother, I wanted to ask you something," Emily said. "I am writing a piece for a women's magazine about love and marriage, and I wanted to know what you think makes a marriage last. You and Father had something special. What was your secret?" Amelia thought for a long moment, watching the children play, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch. "I do not know if there is a secret," she said finally, "but I think the foundation of a lasting marriage is patience and respect. Your father understood that when we met. I was grieving, and he did not try to fix me or rush me. He just waited, and he made it clear that he would keep waiting for as long as I needed. That kind of patience comes from genuine love and respect for another person's journey." "But it must have been hard for him," Emily said. "To love you and have to wait." "I am sure it was," Amelia agreed. "But he never made me feel guilty about it. And when I was ready, when I could finally open my heart again, the love we built was stronger because it was founded on that respect and understanding. We were true partners, your father and I. We faced everything together, made decisions together, supported each other through the hard times, and celebrated together during the good times." "I wish more people understood that," Emily said softly. "I see so many marriages that seem to be based on convenience or social pressure rather than real love and partnership." "Your father and I were fortunate," Amelia said. "We found each other at the right time, even though it seemed like the wrong time when we met. But timing is less important than intention. He intended to love me well, and he did, every single day for 42 years, and I did the same for him. That is what makes a marriage last." They sat together in comfortable silence, and Amelia felt a deep sense of peace. Her life had been long and full, marked by both sorrow and joy, loss and love. She had lived through the transformation of the West from frontier to civilization, had raised 5 children and seen them raise children of their own, had built something lasting with the man she loved. Amelia lived for another 10 years, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. She passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1940, at the age of 81. Her children found her in the morning, a slight smile on her face, as if she had seen something wonderful in her dreams. They buried her next to Thomas in the small cemetery on the ranch, under a stand of cottonwood trees with a view of the mountains they had both loved. At her funeral, which was attended by more than 300 people, Daniel spoke again. "My mother was an extraordinary woman," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She knew great sorrow early in life, but she did not let that sorrow define her. She chose to love again, to live fully, to build a life of meaning and purpose. She and my father created something beautiful together. Not just this ranch, but a family built on love and respect. They showed us all what it means to be true partners, to support each other through everything life throws at you. My mother's legacy is not just in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren she leaves behind, but in the example she set of how to live with courage and grace and love." After the funeral, as the family gathered at the ranch house, the grandchildren asked to hear stories about Amelia and Thomas. Daniel and his siblings obliged, sharing memories of their parents' courtship and marriage, of the patience and respect that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. "Grandmother always said that grandfather gave her the greatest gift anyone could give," Emily's daughter Sarah said. "He gave her time to heal and the freedom to love again when she was ready. That is the kind of love everyone should hope to find." "It is," Daniel agreed. "And it is the kind of love they both modeled for all of us. They showed us that real love is patient, that it respects the other person's journey, that it is about building something together rather than trying to possess or control each other." As the sun set over the ranch that had been built by Thomas and Amelia's love and hard work, their descendants gathered on the porch of the house in the canyon. 5 children, 14 grandchildren, and 32 great-grandchildren, all of them beneficiaries of the legacy of love that Thomas and Amelia had created. The ranch continued to thrive under Daniel's management, and then under his son's management. The house in the canyon remained in the family, maintained as a retreat and a reminder of the love story that had started there nearly 60 years earlier. And on the anniversary of Thomas and Amelia's wedding each May, the family gathered to remember them and to celebrate the enduring power of patient, respectful, lasting love. Years later, when Emily finally published the article she had been working on, she included her mother's words about patience and respect being the foundation of a lasting marriage. The article resonated with readers across the country, and Emily received hundreds of letters from women who said it had changed how they thought about love and relationships. But for the Landry family, those words were not just abstract concepts. They were the living legacy of two people who had found each other in the aftermath of tragedy and had built something beautiful together through patience, respect, and love that grew stronger with each passing year. Thomas Landry had made a promise to Amelia back in 1882, standing on a dusty street in Evanston, Wyoming. "I will wait," he had said. "However long it takes, I will wait until you are ready to love again." And he had kept that promise, giving her the time and space she needed to heal while making it clear that he would be there when she was ready. That patience had been rewarded with a marriage that lasted over 4 decades, that produced 5 children and countless descendants, that built a ranch that would endure for generations. But more than that, it had been rewarded with a love that was deep and true and lasting, the kind of love that changes not just 2 people but everyone they touch. In the end, Amelia's story was not about grief or loss, though those were part of it. It was about the courage to love again after heartbreak, about the patience to wait for the right person at the right time, about the respect that forms the foundation of true partnership. It was about a rancher who understood that the best things in life are worth waiting for, and a woman who learned that her heart was capable of holding more love than she ever imagined. And it was about a life lived fully, in the wild spaces of Wyoming, in a time when the West was still being shaped by the dreams and determination of people willing to work hard for what they wanted. Thomas and Amelia Landry had dreamed of a life together, and they had worked hard to build it, and the result was a legacy that would endure long after they were both gone.